All right, so this is an introduction into the interface for Rhino. What we're going to be looking at here is just a really brief introduction to where things are and how things are functioning. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down because I've customized the interface already. When you open Rhino, you're going to have something on here that basically sets up and gives you a command search tool. It's generally useless if you know what command you're trying to use. You should be able to obviously identify that through the command line. So what we have here running across the top, we have the basic menus. Pretty much all of the commands that you're going to be able to run in Rhino are somewhere running across the top here, embedded in these menus. So if we look at this, you guys can explore this if you guys are looking for a specific function or trying to explore the software. It's a really handy place to look. Right below that, you have the command line. Rhino was originally a plugin for AutoCAD, and so what we have here is an infrastructure here where we can start to take in run commands, like we can type things like line, and then it'll enable us to create a line through that. So it's a really exceptional way to run commands, and you'll find yourself using that a lot. Underneath that, you have the main toolbars in here. Just really common things in Microsoft softwares. Open, new, save, print, all of that. Moving more towards the right, we have sort of the functions that enable us to pan through and cycle through and orbit around, adjust our views, view windows, and things like that. If you ever get caught up in Rhino has a weird tendency to, if you position an object and rotate around it consistently, it'll shift around and it constantly orients over that, and it saves that orientation, and sometimes it gets stuck or the camera starts to lock up. You can reset that by just basically clicking that button and resetting it. Setting views, setting construction planes, things like that. You shouldn't really have to get into that until you get into some more advanced functionality. We have layers and properties, and I'll show you how I like to set up my interface here in a second. Then we have to adjust the viewports. If we're in this, we can shade it so we can actually see through this. Shading can also be activated by right-clicking on this, and we can go in and do things like ghosted so we can see into the objects. And you can explore that just by right-clicking. You can pull that up, and you can go into whatever view you prefer. We can render that. If you have a rendering engine, you can render out objects. We'll get into that here in a little bit. Lighting, some of the systems tools, really basic stuff running across the top. And if you need to create dimensions, all right, we can zoom in on this. What I like to do, and most of the time you saw when I opened this up, I had some toolbars here. I like to run the properties toolbar and the layers toolbar, and I'll just have those going up here. Anybody who's ever worked in Photoshop or AutoCAD, anything like that, clearly understands the effectiveness of using layers. And so what we have here is this enables us to start to obviously organize some of the data, and then has immediate access to that. So we can start to control those things. As we create geometries, properties is really a handy tool to have. We can scroll down here and we can start to control things about the object. We can turn off the isoforms and start to edit and control that. If we're not selected an object, we can change the viewport properties. This is really handy if you guys are trying to create renderings or animations. You can change the lens length. You can go to 35mm lens. We can go really extreme on this and create some 20mm lens, so we can really start to distort the geometries and create presentations that are really effective. All right, I'll just go ahead and return that back and you see what happens. So I really like keeping those up, and really you just saw I just typed in the commands, properties, and layer. You can also click these guys to toggle them on and off. And then you just basically, I've docked them on the right side of my interface. Running across the bottom, we have, I'll just go ahead and disable. I'll just pop that down. You're going to see the snap, ortho, planar, O-snap, and report history. Snapping snaps to the grid, so when if I come over here and start drawing lines, it's going to look at this, and each one of these points that we look at them in particular, enlarge that by double-clicking, is actually connected on the grid, and it's wanting to snap to that grid. So ortho, obvious orthographics or orthogonal geometries, that basically forces it to be 90-degree angles, so you guys can create all those really beautiful floor plans to the heart's content. Planar tries to maintain the construction plane, so right now we're in top view, so the construction plane is essentially, for all intents and purposes, the ground plane. When we're in the right view, and I'm just going to do a quick orbit here to show you, turns it into an axonometric view or isometric view. The construction plane is the grid that we see here, so that's everything is going to, whenever we try and build geometry in this view, it's going to try and maintain that on that construction plane. And so you can see here, this is, right clicking, it's trying to build up geometry on that. So go ahead and reset my view so I can get back to this. Object snapping, O-snapping, this is really handy when you actually start to build geometry. You can snap to the endpoints, you can snap to whatever's near. It's generally less functional if you're trying to do something precise. Points, the middle of something, the center of something. If you have an object, it'll try and calculate the centroid. The intercept, perpendicular, you get it. There's also a thing called Smart Track, which will enable you, if you're drawing geometry, here we can track onto this. We roll over, it turns white, and we can build geometry that is in alignment with other geometry. I'll just leave that away. And then as we going through the last component here is we have the two main toolbars. There's a lot of stuff here. It's essentially organized into just like sort of canceling. Then it builds up. Rhino's a surface modeler, so it starts at the sort of rudimentary point scale, and then it works its way into, so you have points, and then you have curves that are comprised of points. These are either weighted points or they're literally polylines that are 1 degree curves that are built around that. Or we can go through here, create curves. Then we have some tools down here where we can actually see how the points are weighting the curve and controlling that information. There's a lot of different curve tools. I suggest you guys explore them. Once you have created curves, curves drive surfaces, so we can come in here and start to create things like lofts. I'll escape out of that view, and I'll pull this apart. We create some really simple, just by typing the loft command. We create surfaces from curves, and you can see how that's actually being driven. Beyond that, from surfaces, you can create solids, boxes, things like that. Like I said, Rhino is a surface modeler, not a solid modeler. So when we do things like explode, I'm just going to return this back to shading. You can see that each one of these surfaces actually has no thickness. This has implications when we get into 3D printing and things like that. So once you have, that's basically all of the generative components, and then we have modification tools or extraction tools. We can extract curves out of surfaces. We can do a little bit of very limited mesh modeling stuff with this as well. We can explode and join. We can split and trim. We can group. Generally speaking, this is not the best practice because it starts to make you feel like things are joined when they're actually not. So that has implications, again, when you start to generate closed geometries or trying to control surface orientation, things like that. We can start to reveal information about curves. I'm just going to go ahead and delete the surface away here. We can turn the control points on, and we can change that as well. There's two different views. We can go to the weighted controls or the actual points on the line. We can create text that's sort of limited in function. Move is probably the most powerful. If we click and hold on this, you see each one of these guys has little arrows. We can pull out toolbars that have a bunch of nested tools in them. And these have, in some cases, go several layers thick. So we can pull that out. And a lot of tools are in here. As we get into some of the other videos, we can explain them. But taper, flowing, shearing, bending, all of that good stuff. Then we have copying, we have rotating, scaling, and then we have last toolbar here is some analysis tools. So, and that's just sort of, you guys are going to get into this as you guys explore the software, but that's just sort of the basic interface in terms of the framework. Within the viewports, each one of these guys starts out with 4 views. You can customize this if you like, but I don't really see a need. Obviously, there's 2 types of views. There's paraline views and perspective views. Perspective where it gets foreshortened, and then paraline views where it's literally what you see is what you get. There's no foreshortening at all, no horizon line whatsoever. So if you want to get into an isometric view, you can either just use the arrow keys and start rotating around, or you can use the orbit tool when you're on one of those views and actually shift that around, and it'll. In terms of some of the hotkeys, if I hold Control and right-click, it'll zoom. If I hold Shift and right-click, it'll pan. If I right-click in a view that's already set up in an orbit, it'll automatically orbit. If I right-click in one of these other views, it'll pan. So you'll get a hang of that as things go on and go through it. All right, that's the basics. Just sort of an introduction to the interface here.